the technology to make podcasting easier has just grown exponentially. So just to kind of give everyone sort of a baseline, when I started Produce Your Podcast in 2016, Zoom existed, but it was not on anyone's radar. It was like GoToMeetings or Zoom. Like, it had a brand, but nobody, the pandemic obviously blew Zoom up out of the water. But in 2016, there were no remote recording opportunities for broadcast quality capture. So our team honed a technology out of the UK and licensed it and brought it in. And we were one of the pioneers in remote recording with live engineers in the studio. We started doing that almost 10 years ago. Then fast forward, there were Zoom, obviously it kind of exploded during the pandemic, but then now there are some really amazing platforms called Riverside, Squadcast that was just purchased by Descript. And they are remote recording platforms that just give you a lot more flexibility with the quality of your audio, but they're easy interface, just like what we're using on Zoom. And then Descript, which ideally you'll probably link in the show notes. The great thing about that tool is that if you aren't an editor by trade, then you can actually upload your audio and video and you can remove those filler words. Like they have automatic filler word removal. So wouldn't that have been amazing when you were doing it?
I wish.
The amount of time it saves. Now, the technology is not perfect. It can clip it. It can do some wonky things while they're still advancing it and making it better. But just the amount of time it saves for an independent podcaster, and just they have the ability to enhance studio quality sound. There's so much more now than there were tools available than there were, when I started. And, in podcast years, we're like 100. So
When it comes to this podcast, the All Things Book Marketing Podcast by Smith Publicity, I don't do it entirely alone. So shout out to Elisa and Katie, who are a huge help in, like you said, turning it into content. Katie helps with the blog. Elisa helps turn the transcript into the blog. And then Katie posts it and does great things optimizing that way. But when it comes to booking, hosting, editing, and distributing, that is going to be mostly all me. And I would say it takes me anywhere between, including the recording and the booking, between 6 to 10 hours per episode. Would you say that's about right?
I would say you're a pro at it. I would say that is to be super realistic, I would say that is the minimum amount of time that you would want to allocate per episode. And some of that is going to be dependent upon how many marketing assets do you create? How many, do you send out a follow-up email to each of your guests with pre-written social media posts and sharing information for them? Because the more likely you are to do that, the more likely they are to share your episode out. So a tip in that regard would be like making sure that even the image, the graphic image, if you update it and you include a headshot of them or your audio promo has their voice in it, they're going to be more likely to share it out to their network, which is an advantage for you. So, but that's an extra step. I can't tell you how many podcasters I come across. We do a lot of podcast audits for people who maybe started their podcast on their own and it may have stagnated and they just want to be like, did I get this right? What can I do to unbottleneck it to grow it further? And one of the things that we find a lot are some of these identifiers that they're not communicating with their guests because they just get overwhelmed and it's like, okay, it's one more thing. It just gets put on the back burner. So I think that's where you really want to hone in on what's the most important part of this process for your time and making sure you have a checklist. I think having a checklist or using a project management system, I don't know how you guys do it, but like we could not live without Monday.com because we are managing so many different shows simultaneously, but everything in essence has a templated checklist. Even though all our shows are custom, the workflow is as templated as possible so that everybody can cross their T's and dot their I's. So yeah, that was a really long answer for a short question, but there's just so many variables that go into it. And I want people to have a solid, realistic expectation, but not be fearful of it because you can do as little or as much as you want, and you can grow into this workflow and optimize it as you continue to get more comfortable with the process.
You're right. I have fully optimized my workflow. I've been doing it over 2 years now. So I have the graphics already pre-made, and it's really easy for me to go into Canva and switch out the headshot and the names. And then you will be getting an email from me, follow-up email with the links and the graphic for you to share after this
Awesome.
episode.
Thank
So
you. We will
no
share
worries
it.
about that. But then I also have pre-made templated emails for following up, making sure that they're getting everything that they need, sending questions in advance, inviting people on the show. So all of that does help me to save time as well as having a process down. And I do use AI to help develop the transcript. And then we have Elisa come in and turns it into this great blog post that kind of summarizes some of the main points. And then again, using the same graphic really helps, and the same kind of structure, and of course, changing it up individually for the episode. So I have optimized my time that way. So that's a great point, is that when I first started this, it took a lot more time than it's currently taking me. But before we go back into time, because I know that's something we could spend a full episode on, let's switch over to talking about equipment.
Okay.
Normally I have my whole setup. I have my speaker and my headphones and everything. I am working from home this week. So it's my home office with my little recording, my pods. But this is something that I've heard recommended, is having any kind of microphone is better than having no microphone at all. So what are your thoughts on equipment and requirements, recommendations?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, I don't believe in coincidences. So I think it's a happy accident that you were having your setup today be remote from home, because we talk a lot about how podcasting is portable for the listener, but we don't talk a lot about how being a podcast host can also be a portable experience. Because I think so many people, again, they're just learning that you don't actually have to go into a broadcast studio in your town where you live to record a podcast. Can you? Absolutely. Is it one of the most fun things ever? It is if you're Traci DeForge, but it's not that much fun for everybody. And again, about efficiency, like the most important thing is to have a setup that works for you and is efficient for you. Having a microphone is incredibly important. And it is, to your point, best to have one if you're guesting on podcast or if you're hosting your own podcast. The type of microphone, there are all different ranges of investments. The one thing I will say is that there are a couple of microphones that don't have the branding cachet that other microphones have, that are far better microphones and are equally as cost effective. So one podcast mic that I really like to recommend for people who are first starting out is an Audio Technica 2100 mic, because that microphone has two opportunities for connection. You can have a USB, which most people know exactly what that is, that you can plug directly into your laptop. You could throw it in a carry-on. For all intents and purposes, you could throw it in a big purse if you carry a big purse, or in your laptop bag. But having that mic to start out with, plugging that into USB, is great. The reason why you want to invest in that mic specifically is because it also has what's called an XLR cable connection. And that's for when you go to your next level of audio quality and you want to implement an interface box. So there's an audio interface box option. It's called Scarlett. It's a Focusrite 2i2. You can plug the mic into the interface box, and then the interface box plugs in by USB into your computer. And that's going to up level your sound significantly, but it's not going to change your price point because you've already bought a mic that you can grow with. So if you buy, like, for example, a Blue Yeti, what I will say about Blue Yeti is they have done a really, really good job of marketing themselves. And I will leave it there. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
But the Audio Technica gives you that USB portability, but then you can grow with it. Now, if you want to jump right in and you want to, and just for cost comparisons, you can get that Audio Technica mic on Amazon. I just recently referred someone to that mic, and they had it on sale for like $49 or $79. Like, we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but we're talking about a good quality mic. And then secondarily, for our clients, when we do our sound checks and diagnostics and work with them to set up their home studios or office studios, we source the Rode Pod mic, and that's PODMIC. It's slightly more expensive than the Audio Technica, and it doesn't have the dual USB and the XLR. So that's going to be for you if you're like, okay, I want to go all in on this thing. I want a good mic that's affordable and an interface box. Those two are very compatible with each other. And then you can go all the way up to, if you want to get super extravagant, which I have mic envy over right now, is the Shure mic, which is, those are more in like the $450 to $500 ranges. And they're amazing, but they're basically like wearing the Rolex of the podcasting mic, right? Like you can get just as amazing of a recording through the Audio Technica, the Rode Pod mic. It's just the Shure mic is just, it's luxurious. It's like your Louis Vuitton bag versus your Coach bag, right? Like, I mean, we'll just put it in girl logic.
That's fun.